One of my favorite kinds of programs to put together for the Philharmonic is a program that has two pieces, one on either side of the intermission, because it invariably forces the issue of comparing them. You know, what do these two works, however seemingly disparate, have in common? I think the first such program we did was many years ago. We did the Beethoven Overture and Complete Incidental Music to Egmont on the first half, and Khachaturian's very heroic Second Symphony on the second half. And people were saying, boy, Beethoven and Khachaturian, who would have thought? But there were some comparisons that could be drawn. So for our season finale this year, we're doing two great masterworks from Russian-born composers, the Third Symphony by Sergei Rachmaninov and the Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky. Formidable works both. Interesting that both of them were not successful at their premieres for very different reasons. The Stravinsky was a shocker, and the Rachmaninoff was a disappointment. The Stravinsky, which came out in 1913, was considered so radical in every musical way possible, harmony, melody, and especially rhythm, that the audience couldn't believe that they were listening to this piece that one commentator said sounded sometimes as if the whole orchestra was one vast percussion instrument. And there was a very famous riot. 20 plus years later, when Rachmaninoff's Third Symphony was premiered, a lot of the people who had counted on him for this kind of super verdant, lush romanticism were disappointed in what they felt was a sort of a pulling in on the reins. They felt that it perhaps wasn't as expressive as some of his former works. It certainly is as expressive as those other works. It's expressive in a different way. He evolved. It was the 1930s. He couldn't help being affected by other music, by other trends, and yet it is still absolutely Rachmaninovian to the nth degree. In rehearsing these two works, of course, the orchestra and I started seeing similarities, however superficial or tenuous they may seem. One, of course, is that the Rite of Spring opens up with this very famous lone bassoon solo high up in its stratospheric register. And the Rachmaninoff opens up with this ghostly, it almost sounds like plain chant, incredibly scored for two clarinets, one muted horn, and one solo cello playing in unison. This is an idea that permeates the entire symphony. Rachmaninoff has this wondrous way of bringing the same theme back, somewhat disguised, reharmonized, reorchestrated, but it's in all three movements. All those people who wondered if he was getting too modern, I wonder if they thought to themselves, well, you know, nobody else ever wrote a symphony where the opening idea permeates the entire thing. Anyway, a little later on, he has an absolutely drop-dead gorgeous theme. Why people thought that he had lost his touch of romanticism, I'll never know. It first appears in the cellos with offbeat chords in the woodwinds. And to those people who were thinking that he got too modern, certainly no other famous symphony had ever had a gorgeous theme in the cellos with offbeat chords in the woodwinds. Poor Rachmaninoff. It seems like some people just can't please everybody no matter what they do. Personal postscript: when I was in college from 1971 to 77, it was considered de rigueur to worship at the shrines of such composers as John Cage and Morton Feldman. I was considered a reactionary. I worshipped at the shrines of Rachmaninoff and Vaughan Williams, who constantly were being deprecated by the composition students especially. Why? Because in the face of Stravinsky, of Schoenberg, of other musical revolutionaries, these composers still clung to tonality. You know, never mind the quality of the music, the fact that it was tonal was enough to curse it in their eyes. I could never give up on Rachmaninoff, never have, never will. Just as Rachmaninoff has been cursed for being too traditional, not traditional enough, as was said before, the Rite of Spring was an all-out assault on the musical expectations of 1913. And there too, now that we know the Rite of Spring, some of the shock value has worn off. And yet, some of what's shocking to me is the fact that so much of what people complained about, I don't think is borne out by the music itself. You know, people who would say the Rite of Spring has no melody. Well, for goodness sake, is anything more hummable than this? And just as there are these melodies that sort of almost melismatically speak their exotic magic in the Rachmaninoff, there are several like melodies in the Stravinsky piece. There's one melody that comes in not long after the beginning of part 2, the second half, which he deploys in various ways. At one point, he has this tune. And he states it in thirds, which is to say he constantly has the interval of the third below that melodic line. Now, this is something that was done constantly by Brahms. Or Tchaikovsky. And even to the present day, people can't seem to resist tunes with thirds in them. But I digress. So Stravinsky takes this tune in thirds, has this one somewhat off-kilter bass line that he adds to it, and he gets this magical result. I mean, the score is replete with melody. Maybe not those long cantabile tunes that people wanted from their Brahmses and their Tchaikovskys, but melody nonetheless. And thank goodness we're now at a point where even though the energy of the Rite of Spring still gives you that charge, that shock, it's now part of our musical vocabulary and can be fully appreciated as the masterpiece that it truly is. I wanted to do a little bit of shameless promotion for the Philharmonic's next season, which is going to have a lot of wonderful riches in it. We're going to start the season with a program called A Great Teacher is a Great Artist, where we're going to have some of the greatest student-teacher relationships in music, one after the other. We're starting with Saint-Saëns, then music by his pupil Fauré, and then music by Fauré's pupil Ravel, and then music by Ravel's pupil Vaughan Williams, including a relatively rare United States performance of Vaughan Williams's penultimate symphony, number 8. Our second program is going to feature music written between 1900 and 1930, 5 very different works from the 20th century, which is going to include a work by a man known principally as a conductor, Dimitri Mitropoulos. He started out as a composer. We're going to play a symphonic poem that he wrote when he was about 19 tender years old, a very beautiful work. We're going to show an infamous surrealist film by René Clair called Entr'acte, with the music that was specially written for it by Eric Satie. We're going to play 2 works by Sibelius, a pair of short pieces for cello and orchestra with our soloist Mara Finkelstein. And we're going to end the concert with the ever-beloved Pines of Rome by Respighi. Our third concert is going to feature the United States premiere of a symphony by a brilliant composer from England named Ruth Gibbs, the William Shakespeare Overture by Friedrich Kuhlau, an orchestration of Bach's Saint Anne Prelude and Fugue, an orchestration by the conductor Frederick Stock, and our Don Bichelle competition winner, Miao Liu, on flute, is going to play the Ibert Concerto for Flute and Orchestra. And to wrap up the season, we're going to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the birth of the German composer Bernd Alois Zimmermann with a performance of truly one of the most emotionally shattering, wrenching pieces of the 20th century. I don't want to attempt the title in German, but the English translation is "And looking around me, I saw all the injustices under the sun," a work for 2 actors, bass, baritone, solo, and orchestra. Our 2 actors are going to be David Pichette and John Patrick Lowry, and our bass, baritone soloist is Michael Delos. And then we're going to come full circle. We're going to end the season with the music of Saint-Saëns, as we began it, with a performance of his organ symphony with soloist Joseph Adam. So please, please join us for any, but even better, for all of these fine programs.